Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 18th ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by a very special guest. He is the host of the Bleav in Wizards podcast, as well as a writer for both Bullets Forever and Mid Major Madness. Let me welcome Matt Modderno to the show. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Fan of your work, and looking forward to talking a little local sports.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. I mean, let's get right into it. I just want to start by asking when you first knew that you wanted to work in the sports industry.
I'm probably around your age, to be honest. Enjoyed following these things, and sports writing was a little bit more of a thing. Back way back in my day than it probably is now. Digital media wasn't quite as poppin' at the time, so I went to the University of Maryland, studied journalism there, and did a little bit of that out of college. And it's a lot of work, and you got to love it, and put in like long hard hours. So that's my advice to you: is make sure it's something that you definitely want to do full time as a career before you go into it. Otherwise, it's still a really cool hobby and something fun to get to do on the side.
Yeah, and I mean, just the other day, you announced that your YouTube channel, the Department of Hoops, will now be featuring other Wizards podcasters and content creators, including Greg Finberg, Chase Carroll, and so many more. Can you just describe what we can expect to see following these major changes?
Yeah, great. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, what we're trying to do is just have like local basketball content centralized in one place. So everybody that's a fan of local teams, you have kind of a one-stop shop you can go to get different perspectives, hear different voices. And I think each of the shows brings something kind of slightly different to the table. So you can kind of click in one place and see different content and sample through what works best for you. And we'll have pregame and postgame shows for hopefully every game this season here as we go, and then also going to try to build up local college basketball, coverage as well. So we'll have a GW show, working on a Georgetown show right now, and got a Maryland show. So going to keep kind of building through there as we go.
Yeah, and of course, I listen to the pregame and postgame shows. Really big fan of those. So keep up the
Thank
great
you.
work there. And then speaking of the Department of Hoops, the first ever video that you posted on that channel was an interview with Francis Tiafo 4 years ago. However, of course, 4 years ago, that was before he really became the household name that he is now, especially for at least DMV natives. But what was that opportunity like being able to interview him and just talk to him in general?
It was great. I knew Francis was a Wizards fan, and I play a lot of tennis, so we actually have some mutual friends and contacts that were able to put us in touch. And I know some of the folks that represent him, so they were able to kind of put in a word that, hey, we've got this Wizard show, and he was nice enough to come on and chop it up with us a little bit. He's a little busier now, so it might be tough to pull off a second interview, but he's a great guy, really nice. The people I know that know him, speak very highly of him as a person. So obviously great to root for another local DMV guy here who's absolutely killing it on the Pro Tour.
Yeah, of course. Now moving over to some Wizards talk. On Monday, Washington re-signed former first-round pick Corey Kispert to a 4-year, $54 million contract. Kispert obviously specializes from beyond the arc, attempting 6 3-pointers per game last season. What's your thoughts on this extension?
I think it's great. Honestly, I think that's seems like fair market value for the level of player he is currently, and that's even if he doesn't continue to progress. I think that's been the one real strength of this front office so far. Not the only strength, but probably the biggest thing I think I would give them credit for is just the contracts they've signed people to are team friendly. And, even for someone like Kuzma, who didn't look so great in game one or in the preseason, I think his deal will still age well because of the descending nature of the dollar amounts. But the Denny Avdia contract was obviously great. And it was a bargain the minute they signed it. And hopefully that's the case with Kispert. That last preseason game that he played, he looked awesome. And if we can see that player more often than not this year, I think that deal will age really well.
And of course, the Wizards just played their season opener last night, where they took a 122 to 102 loss against the Boston Celtics. Not a surprising outcome by any means. What are your main takeaways following that matchup?
I thought the young guys weren't scared, and that was kind of the biggest thing to see. You saw Bub Carrington, hold up well against a much stronger, older Drew Holiday, and he wasn't backing down from the challenge. So that was really encouraging to see. Alex Sarr was active on the defensive end, blocked a lot of shots, took a couple maybe ill-advised jumpers that you'd like to see him get a little closer to the hoop, but that's all right. He was really good on the one end of the floor, and I think that's pretty good. And you'll take the good with the bad here as they grow. Keyshawn George didn't shoot the ball as well as he had during the preseason, but again, wasn't afraid and he was pretty active defensively. So that's really the big thing for me. You've got Coulibaly not backing down from Jason Tatum. He's got to get a little stronger, but put up a good fight. And I think that's all you can do against the top 10 players in the league. Nobody really actually stops them. It's just, do they miss shots? And I think Coulibaly made him take and make some tough shots. And that was cool to see. He had a couple good drives. He made a couple really good passes. Maybe got a little pass happy later in the game, and you like to see him shoot a little bit more, but he also got to the free throw line a ton, which is great. Jordan Poole was absolutely supernova for the first, 15 minutes of the game, which was also super cool to see. And I hope that's more of the Jordan Poole that we get to see throughout the year here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you look at that starting lineup last night, I would say there were two things that really caught me by surprise. First and
Mhm.
foremost, Bub Carrington starting, and then also Jonas Valanciunas coming off the bench. Did you expect any of those moves?
The Bub one was a bigger surprise to me. I wondered about the Valanciunas one just because they were able to play a little faster against a smaller Boston team without Valanciunas and Sarr out there together. I think if you start them both, you would have ended up with Sarr on Tatum or Brown, and I don't know how, well that would have suited them overall. And for him, he was able to kind of feast against, backup centers. So that might be the best way to actually feature him is against, the lesser big men for some of these teams. So Boston, not especially deep in the front court. So I think staggering them like that was actually probably a pretty good move. And then they played a decent amount of minutes together. But Bub starting right out of the gate, like I thought it was going to be, maybe Keyshawn George we saw start a preseason game or Corey Kispert, start a game potentially. But hey, I like it. Lean into the youth movement. And I think whatever the stat Monumental had was that was like basically the youngest starting lineup ever. Is pretty awesome to see. And them embracing the youth movement, I think, is kind of all you can ask for.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot to look forward to with that youth, of course. Now, with Bub Carrington, obviously he suffered that mild ankle sprain towards the end of last night's game.
Mhm.
Luckily, it doesn't look like he'll be out for an extended period of time. What did you see from him yesterday, before that injury that really impressed you?
Just the fearlessness. I think that's the biggest thing. There are a lot of young guys that come into the league and they look a little shell shocked for a while or deer in the headlights. And he wasn't really scared of the moment. Didn't wasn't crazy productive, but I think that's just the biggest thing you want to see from these guys is that mentally they're bought in. I think if they work hard, the skills and strength and things like that will come along. It's just, do they have the right mentality and mindset? And all of them seem to put in enough effort on the defensive end. So I think that's really something that's good to see for Wizards fans long term is that, hey, these guys are trying to do things the right way. And, it really points back to the kind of blueprint of play that this front office is looking for is guys that are going to compete on both ends. I think that was the biggest thing we heard out of training camp was that Bub Carrington was the most competitive guy, in camp. And you could see that last night. You're chirping with a guy that's likely a Hall of Famer in Drew Holiday, in your first game in the NBA. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the other rookie that I, of course, want to focus on is Alex Sarr, who you
Mhm.
touched on a little bit earlier, but definitely struggled, at least when you look at the box score. In
Mhm.
22 minutes, he scored just 2 points, however, that was to go, along with 5 rebounds and 2 blocks. What's your initial reaction when it comes to Sarr's performance last night?
I'd like to see him, mix up the shot diet a little bit more. Try to, especially against a smaller Boston team, like we talked about. You're quicker and more athletic than someone like Al Horford when they're guarding you. So I'd like to see him maybe try to drive a little bit rather than kind of bail the defense out by taking some longer jumpers. But that's all something they can kind of correct with film study. I think there were a couple opportunities for him to, really lock in defensively, and he showed some unique physical tools that made him the number 2 overall pick. Like he was able to stay with guys on the perimeter. He bought on a couple of pump fakes, which you don't want to see, and bailed the offensive player out and fouled them. But again, that's another thing that I think with some coaching and right now you just want to let them play, and then you just go through it with them in film. And hey, this is what we do want you to do. Do more of this, and we don't want to see more of this. And those are really good learning opportunities. And I think that's the biggest thing against the best team in the league is that everybody on their roster is going to put you through the paces. So just for him, I think that's invaluable experience. And that was actually something that Keyshawn George talked about after the game was just how cool it was. And he welcomed the opportunity to guard Jason Tatum because that's the ultimate learning experience. So I think for for all those rookies last night, that was, as good a learning experience as you get right out of the gate.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I think heading into this season, and even when Sarr was playing in France, he was highly regarded as maybe a liability on offense a little bit, just not as productive, of course, as he is on defense. And I mean, when you look at that, he did he did play very well from beyond the arc, at least during preseason. Do you see him kind of progressing as a stretch big in the future?
If he can shoot it like he did in the preseason and hit that percentage of shots, I think you've got an elite stretch big there. I don't know that that's realistic to expect him to shoot quite that well, but if he's in the mid 30s, I think that's a pretty good start given probably what they expected from him coming in. I think it's going to take some time. He probably needs to continue to rep that jump shot out. Doesn't have as many, you know, as much a sample size as some of the guards they would have would, from the perimeter, but it's a great place to start. He's definitely willing to take them, which I think is good. They're not going to have to force him, into that aspect of it. And that's where the league's going, right? Like you saw Boston win a title essentially going 5 out last year. And if Sarr can shoot that kind of, 30s plus percent clip, at least that the defense has to guard him, that gives you a lot more flexibility. And that's something really the Wizards haven't have much of. They've had guys that were kind of either or. They were either a shooter or, a finisher around the rim slash a rim protector. Sarr can really be both. And I think you need that in today's NBA.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that Kyle Kuzma also struggled a little bit out there as well. Just 12 points, 2 rebounds, shooting 37.5% from the field. When you look at Kuzma's trade value, of course, it was a first rounder probably a year ago. Is it still at that first rounder or has it, gotten a little less valuable?
It's hard to say. I would imagine that people in front offices have seen enough of Kyle Kuzma at this point that they know what they're signing up for. So as long as there's no injury leading to this like kind of little slump to start the year here, I think most teams are expecting that he'll play his way into form and be the player that they've seen the last couple of years at the very least. So I wouldn't think that so far we've seen, anything that changes his value. Although, if we're 2 months into the season and we get the same player that we got last night every night, that might start to tank the value a little bit here. But I can't imagine that NBA teams are overreacting to this the same way certain fans are.
Yeah, and do you see him being a guy that is very likely to get traded come the deadline?
I can't figure that out, honestly. It just seems like they've had opportunities to do it and are holding out for like the perfect offer. And it'll be interesting to see how they kind of evolve their thinking over time. That didn't necessarily work out for them with Tyus Jones and his situation. I guess they reportedly turned down a couple second round picks at last year's deadline and lost him for nothing. So at some point, you might just have to kind of strike while the opportunity arises here and pull the trigger on a deal. If somebody offers them a first round pick and a promising young player and maybe some bad salary back, they have to decide if that's the best they're going to get or if it's worth continuing to hold out. I can't imagine his value ever goes much below a first round pick, just given the nature of the contract. And I think a lot of teams will be able to convince themselves that if he is playing poorly, it has as much to do with the situation in Washington and the responsibilities that are heaped on him compared to like what it would be on a playoff team. Here as the first option, of course, he's not going to look, as efficient as he would as the fifth guy or something on a playoff team. So I think, NBA teams are going to have to like parse through what they really think they're getting back and what they're willing to kind of expend to get that player back.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, but of course, Jordan Poole had a heck of a game last night. Really felt like he was the only player out there that could get buckets at will.
Mhm.
17 points in the first quarter, ended the game with 26 points to go along with 4 steals on the defensive end. What did you see last night from him that really showed improvement from the Jordan Poole that we saw last season in Washington?
I mean, he just made a lot of tough shots, and that's kind of what he can bring you is an ability to just heat up from anywhere. I mean, he was incredible that first quarter, especially, and he was fine the rest of the game. I'm more focused on the defensive end with him. Like, I actually thought he put up pretty good resistance for large stretches of that game, and that's really something you need from him is some amount of buy-in on that end of the floor too. Like, he's going to do what he does offensively, and overall, he ended up being really efficient last night, over 50% from the field and 50% from the three-point line. you're probably not going to get that player every night. It's just that's a lot of tough shots to have to make with the defense keying in on you. So can he give you anything else? And I'd like to see him continue to create for his other younger teammates. And if he keeps shooting the ball the way he is, he's going to draw a lot of attention. So being a willing passer and all those things that we know he can do is really what you want to see from him, moving forward, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another player that's going to be very interesting to watch this season is Johnny Davis, who the Wizards selected with the 10th overall pick in the 2022 NBA draft. Of course, Davis has had a slow start to his career and is quick to have earned that bust label. However, when he did state going into this year that he's going to shoot with his natural form, unlike
Mhm.
previous years when, it was messed with by trainers and all that. Of course, he also did shine during the preseason with a game winner against the New York Knicks.
Mhm.
What role do you expect to see from Davis this season, and will he be able to turn his career around?
That's such a good question, and I have no answer for you, and I would love to hear your answer after this. But it's just, I think for him, honestly, it almost seems like a fresh start might be good at this point. There's some negative baggage here, just based on his quotes. I'm assuming there's some amount of resentment from him toward the organization and what they tried to get him to do with the shooting form. So maybe just a clean start somewhere else would be better for both parties at this point. He came in and played a decent amount of minutes early last night. It didn't really do a whole lot, honestly, in my opinion, but he was fine overall. I would say he's going to put in effort on the defensive end. It's always going to come back to, can he hit enough shots to justify, being out there offensively? And I think the jury is still out. Like, it was obviously nice to see a couple flashes in the preseason. Hopefully he can be more comfortable getting back to, his kind of old form, but the jury's out. Like I said, it remains to be seen if he can translate that into more consistent success. Like, he's had a few moments here and there, but can you string a couple good days, a couple good games together? And I think that'll go a long way for his confidence too. If we can see one, two, three, four, 5 games kind of stacked on top of each other of just solid contributions. So I hope that's the case. Seems like a nice enough guy, not really a vocal guy or a complainer or anything like that. So you want the best for him, and wherever that is, I hope he figures it out.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, I think maybe us as Wizards fans had too high of expectations. We didn't necessarily know what he could do. Not necessarily that we had high expectations, but we
Mhm.
didn't know what to expect from him. And now that we have more of a ground level on what he can do, I think I kind of expect him to play into that role player role throughout his career. Now we
Yeah.
have the players around him. We have Bub Carrington. We have Alex Sarr. We have that youngest starting five in all of the NBA. I think we don't necessarily need that star from him that we wanted, just a player that can help contribute, as you said, on defense, get his shot going, become more productive on offense. And I think he can make a really big impact.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm with you.
Now, I know this is kind of a, general question, a little broad, but if you had to make a Wizards prediction for this season in terms of the record, what would it be?
I don't think the record's going to be particularly good, and I think that's largely because they don't want it to be that good. You've got a really good draft coming up, so you kind of can't afford to mess around. If you have the absolute worst record in the league, the worst you can finish in the draft lottery is fifth. So I think that's really key this year, is being locked into a top 5 pick. And this front office has shown that they're willing to do what they need to do to make sure that that pick, ends up where they want it to end up. And I think that's going to be really vital to the long term success of this rebuild. Is, can they get a big impact player in this year's draft, especially? So, I think they'll kind of work it out in such a way that they don't win more than 20 games. I think probably the 15-ish range that they won last year is probably a little more, where I would probably see them. But I think this team this year can be more competitive across the board than last year's team. You've got young, hungry guys, and they're going to have some nights where they get the doors blown off of them. But for the most part, I think having a lot of young, fresh legs, especially later in the season, is going to allow them to just kind of stay in more games than maybe people are expecting them to.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I do have, more of a fun question before we start to wrap things up. If
Okay.
you had to predict the Wizards' next All Star, who would you say it is? And are they currently on the team right now?
Man, all right. I would say probably the most likely person is not on the team yet, if I had to guess. It's whoever you get in this year's draft probably has as good a chance. But I'd love for one of these guys that they took in the last 2 drafts to be that guy. If Koulibaly can turn himself into, even an all-star caliber player, whether he makes the team or not, I think that goes a long way. Can he be Mikal Bridges or somebody that is at least good enough to be in that kind of conversation? That'd be so great for this organization just to have guys that are in that realm at the very least. So I don't know. It's kind of a cop out answer, I think, but probably more likely that it's the guy that they take in this year's draft.
Yeah, I mean, of course, they get Cooper Flag. We could see him be an all-star, you know, 2, 3 seasons potentially, maybe
Yep.
even that first season, although that's pretty unlikely. However, I do have one final question to ask. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring sports broadcaster and journalist like me, what would it be?
Well, first of all, I would always tell people get a head start, get out and get as many clips as you can, start building a resume, having a portfolio of work to show people. So you're already well on your way with that and you're doing a great job. Being prepared is huge. I know you're super prepared. I watch enough of these to know that you do your homework, you've got your questions laid out in advance. I think that's always important. One thing is maybe just don't be afraid to kind of riff a little bit and deviate from the outline. Like that's something I always kind of have to force myself to do is let the conversation go where it goes, and then you can always kind of steer the ship back to where it needs to be. So I only mention that because that's one I have to kind of keep reminding myself. But just have fun, man. Like this is especially where you're at in your life. Just this is about getting like practice and cool experiences and just continue to have fun with it. If at the end of the day you don't enjoy it, it's because this is a profession that's a labor of love. So if you're gonna do it, you have to continue to like it. So one, don't do too much where you burn yourself out. I think that's another good piece of advice. But yeah, I mean, just keep doing what you're doing. I think and be you, right? Like be organically you, and you're well on your way.
Yeah, of course, really appreciate it. With that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
If anyone's watching this and they are already not subscribing to this channel, make sure that they do it and hit that like button for our guy Matthew here. You're killing it, man. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, of course. Also, if you're watching this, make sure you go to the Department of Hoops YouTube channel. I'll put it in the description of this video. Make sure you subscribe over there. Also, follow Matt on Twitter. Has a lot of great stuff that he posts. Again, big thanks to Matt Modderno for being the 18th ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we'll see you next time.